She always walked quietly, like someone afraid to take up too much space in the world. Her name was Lena, though many people didn't even remember it. In the small town where she lived, everyone seemed to have a label. The baker, the teacher, the mayor's daughter, the singer. But Lena was simply the girl from the cafe. She worked behind the counter of a small coffee shop on the corner of Main Street, serving smiles and steaming cups to people who barely looked her way. Her mornings began before sunrise. She would tie her hair in a loose bun, put on her faded uniform, and walk through the cold, misty streets while the rest of the town still slept. She liked those quiet moments, when everything was still and the only sound was her footsteps on the wet pavement. It was the only time she felt truly free, before the rush of customers, before the noise of the day swallowed her up. The cafe was a cozy place with yellow curtains and the smell of roasted beans. Every morning she arranged the pastries neatly in the glass display and wiped the wooden tables until they shone. Her boss, a kind but busy woman named Mrs. Drew, always greeted her with a quick good morning but rarely stopped to talk. Most customers just nodded or said thanks as they hurried out with their coffee. Lena didn't mind the silence. She was used to being invisible. But sometimes, when the day slowed and the chatter faded, she'd find herself staring at the old radio behind the counter. It always played soft piano music during the slower hours. Those melodies touched something inside her, something warm and far away. She remembered being a little girl, sitting by the window in her grandmother's house, listening to her play an old upright piano. The keys had been chipped and yellowed, but the sound filled the whole room like sunlight. Her grandmother's wrinkled fingers moved gently, yet each note carried strength and emotion. Lena would sit for hours watching and listening, amazed that something so simple could make her heart feel so full. When her grandmother passed away, the piano was sold. Her family said they couldn't afford to keep it, and besides, music won't feed you. Lena was only 10 then, but she never forgot how it felt to be surrounded by that sound, as if the world became kinder for a little while. Years passed, and life became ordinary. School work bills, the kind of life that made you forget your dreams slowly, not all at once. She wanted to learn the piano again someday, but lessons were expensive and the idea of asking for help embarrassed her. She told herself that dreams were for other people, the bold ones, the ones who spoke loudly and took chances. She wasn't one of them. Still, when she cleaned the cafe after hours, she often hummed quietly to herself, simple tunes she made up on the spot. Sometimes, when she thought no one could hear, she'd tap her fingers on the counter like piano keys, pretending the sound was real. One rainy afternoon after her shift ended, she was sent to deliver a box of leftover pastries to the community center nearby. The old building stood near the park, its paint peeling but its spirit alive. Children ran down the hallways after their art classes, and older folks gathered there for evening talks and small events. When she stepped inside, the smell of paint and old books filled the air. As she walked through the corridor, something caught her eye. A dusty piano sitting in the corner of a hall. It was covered with a faded cloth as if forgotten. A small sign was taped to it that read, "Out of order." Lena paused. For a long moment she just looked at it. Her heart gave a small tug. She placed the pastry box on a nearby table and carefully lifted the cloth. Dust rose into the air, making her sneeze. Beneath it, the piano's wood was scratched and dull, but the keys, though yellowed, were still there waiting. She reached out, hesitant, and pressed one key. It made a low, uneven sound like a tired whisper, but it was enough to make her smile. The center manager, a tall woman with glasses, noticed her standing there. "Oh, that old thing," she said kindly. "Hasn't been tuned in years. We keep it for decoration now." Lena nodded politely. "It's beautiful," she whispered. The manager laughed. "You think so? You're the first one to say that." That night, as Lena walked home under her umbrella, she couldn't stop thinking about the piano. Something about it pulled at her heart. It wasn't just an instrument. It was like a piece of her childhood waiting to be rediscovered. The next evening, after closing the cafe, she found herself walking back to the community center. The lights inside were dim and the halls were quiet. The janitor, an elderly man who often worked late, recognized her from the day before and nodded her in. "You here for the piano?" he asked with a small smile. She blushed. "I just wanted to look at it again," he chuckled. Go ahead. It still plays, just needs love, so she sat down. The bench creaked under her weight. She pressed a few keys gently. Some stuck, some worked, some sounded strange. But the notes still filled the room, echoing softly off the walls. She didn't know what she was playing. Her fingers moved clumsily, following a rhythm she barely remembered. But the feeling, that feeling of peace and wonder, came rushing back. She stayed there until the janitor said it was time to lock up. As she left, she promised herself she'd return the next day, and she did. Every night after work, she walked to the community center. Sometimes she brought a small cloth to wipe the dust away. Sometimes a screwdriver to fix a loose key. She didn't know much about repairs, but she learned through trial and error, watching videos on her old phone and saving tips from kind strangers online. Bit by bit, she brought the piano back to life. No one noticed. No one asked where she went after work or what she did. To everyone else, she was still the quiet girl from the cafe who barely spoke. But in that empty hall, she wasn't invisible anymore. She was someone who felt alive. Weeks turned into months. Her playing improved slowly, her fingers learning to trust the keys. She taught herself simple songs, lullabies, small tunes, soft melodies that filled the quiet. Sometimes the janitor would pause his sweeping to listen, leaning on his broom with a smile. He didn't say much, but his eyes said everything: pride, surprise, warmth. One night he told her, "You play with feeling." "Not many do," she laughed shyly. "I don't really know what I'm doing." "That's what makes it beautiful," he said. For the first time in years, Lena began to look forward to something. The cafe was still the same. Noisy mornings, tired afternoons. But now every day had a spark waiting at the end of it. The piano had become her secret friend, her silent companion in a world that rarely listened. Sometimes she wondered what people would think if they saw her play. Would they laugh? Would they be surprised? Or would they simply pass by like always? The thought made her nervous. But then she'd remind herself it didn't matter. This was for her. On her days off, she'd sit by the piano longer, closing her eyes and letting the music guide her. Each note seemed to speak a language her heart understood. It told her she wasn't small. She wasn't invisible. She was someone who could create something beautiful from nothing. And though she didn't know it yet, those quiet nights were leading her towards something far greater than she could imagine. A moment that would change how the whole town saw her forever. But for now, she was just Lena, a humble girl sitting at an old piano, letting her heart learn how to sing again. The days passed quietly as they always did, but something inside Lena had changed. Every evening, she hurried through her cafe shift, counting the minutes until she could return to the old piano. It had become her secret world, a small corner of peace in a noisy, uncaring town. When she played, she forgot everything. The clatter of cups, the voices that never called her name, the long hours of wiping tables, all faded away when her fingers touched the keys. The music didn't need words. It simply said what she could never say aloud. She spent many evenings at the community center fixing and learning. Her clothes smelled faintly of coffee, and her fingers often had tiny burns from the cafe's espresso machine, but she didn't care. The janitor, Mr. Hale, always smiled when she arrived. He'd leave the lights on for her and sometimes bring her a cup of tea. "You sure you're not going to get tired of this old piano?" he'd tease softly. "Never," she'd say with a grin. He'd chuckle and go back to his work, humming along when she played. The piano had grown warmer under her touch. She had managed to clean most of the dust and tighten a few loose strings. The sound was still uneven, but it was no longer broken. It was alive, and like her, every mistake she made became part of her story. Sometimes she'd laugh when she hit the wrong note. Sometimes she'd close her eyes trying to remember her grandmother's hands. Other times tears would fall quietly as she played for reasons she couldn't explain. Her music wasn't perfect, but it was honest. And that honesty had its own beauty. One night she was playing softly when she realized someone was standing by the door. Startled, she stopped. It was a woman holding a broom, one of the evening cleaners. "Don't stop," the woman said kindly. "That was beautiful." Lena blushed and looked down. "Oh, I didn't think anyone could hear me." The woman smiled. "You should let more people hear you. You've got something special." Lena just nodded shyly. Compliments always made her uncomfortable. She wasn't used to them. The next few weeks, more people began to notice her late-night playing. A few staff members would linger in the hall to listen for a moment before heading home. Some clapped quietly when she finished a tune. Lena felt embarrassed but happy too. For once, people were hearing her, not because she spoke, but because she played. One rainy night, when she was about to leave, Mr. Hale handed her a small envelope. "For you," he said. She opened it and found a flyer for the town talent night. It was an annual event held in the community center every spring. Locals performed music, dances, poetry, anything they loved. "You should join," he said. "You've been hiding long enough." Lena's eyes widened. "Oh no, I can't, I'm not ready. People there actually know what they're doing," he shrugged. "Maybe, but no one plays like you. You play from the heart. That's what people remember." She smiled politely and tucked the flyer in her bag, certain she'd throw it away later. But that night she couldn't sleep. The idea kept floating in her mind. The thought of sitting on a stage with everyone looking at her made her stomach twist. Yet another part of her, the part that had been silent for so long, whispered, "What if you tried?" For days she went back and forth in her mind. Fear said no, but hope said yes. One afternoon, as she cleaned the cafe counter, she heard two regular customers talking about the talent show. "Did you see last year's winner?" one of them said. "That little girl with the violin was amazing." "Yeah, and the music teacher's son is performing this year. He's probably going to win again," the other replied. Lena smiled faintly, pretending not to listen. She imagined herself up there, playing quietly while everyone stared. Her hands would shake. Her voice would freeze. But maybe, just maybe, she could show them something real. Later that night, she opened the envelope again. The application form was simple, just a name and a description of the act. She filled it out halfway before stopping. Her heart raced. She told herself she'd think about it tomorrow. The next evening, when she arrived at the community center, Mr. Hale asked, "So, you gonna sign up?" She shook her head quickly. "I don't think I can." He looked at her for a long moment. "You remind me of my wife," he said softly. "She used to play the piano too, said she was never good enough to perform. Then one day she finally did. She didn't win anything, but I've never seen her smile like that again." Lena smiled, touched by his story. "What happened after that?" He smiled back. "She kept playing. That's all that mattered." That night, after everyone left, Lena sat alone with the piano. The hall lights were dim, and the rain outside made soft tapping sounds against the windows. She placed her hands on the keys and whispered to herself, "What if I just try?" She started to play, slow at first, then deeper, stronger. The notes filled the room, bouncing off the empty walls. It was as if the piano itself was urging her not to stop. When she finished, she sat in silence for a long time. Then she smiled, small but real. The next day, she walked into the community office and handed in her form. Weeks passed quickly. The talent night drew near, and she practiced whenever she could. She didn't tell anyone, not even her coworkers at the cafe. It was her secret dream, fragile and precious. Every evening she played until her fingers ached. Sometimes the notes sounded messy, sometimes perfect. She learned to close her eyes and play by feeling, letting her emotions guide her. The janitor often sat nearby, quietly watching. "You're getting better," he'd say. "Maybe a little," she'd laugh. He shook his head. "More than a little. You've got something you can't teach." One night, as she was leaving, she saw the stage being prepared for the show. Chairs were lined up neatly, banners hung, and lights were being tested. It felt surreal, knowing she would soon be sitting there in front of all those people. Her stomach turned at the thought, but deep down a small spark of excitement began to grow. For once, she wasn't just existing. She was working toward something. A few days before the event, she chose her piece. It wasn't a famous song. It was something she had been writing slowly over the past month, her own melody. It had no name yet, but it carried her story inside it. Every high and low note spoke of her quiet life, her lonely days, and her rediscovered hope. The night before the performance, she stayed late at the community center. The hall was empty except for her and the old piano. She played her piece again and again until the stars outside began to fade. At one point, she stopped and looked at her reflection in the shiny black surface of the piano. She barely recognized herself. There was confidence in her eyes now, a light she hadn't seen in years. "You can do this," she whispered. "You've come this far." When she finally left, she turned off the lights and smiled at the piano. "Thank you," she said softly, as if it could hear her. The next morning, the town buzzed with excitement. Posters for the show were everywhere. The cafe was busier than usual, filled with chatter about the evening's event. A few customers mentioned it while ordering. "The talent night's tonight," one woman said cheerfully. "Always a fun time. Wonder who's performing this year." Lena smiled faintly but said nothing. She could feel her heartbeat quicken as she handed over their drinks. When her shift ended, she rushed home to change. She put on a simple dress, pale blue, the color of calm skies, and tied her hair neatly. She didn't have fancy shoes or makeup, but she looked at herself in the mirror and felt proud. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She just wanted to play. As she walked toward the community center, the evening sky glowed orange and pink. The air was cool, carrying the soft buzz of laughter and chatter. People were gathering near the entrance, carrying snacks and cameras. She stopped for a moment before going in, taking a deep breath. Her hands trembled, but her heart felt strangely steady. Inside, she saw the stage again, brighter now under the lights. The same piano sat there, polished and waiting. The same one that had once been covered in dust. The one that had waited patiently for her. Mr. Hale spotted her near the entrance and waved warmly. "You made it," he said proudly. Lena smiled nervously. "I almost didn't." He laughed softly. "You're meant to be here, kid. Trust yourself." She nodded, her eyes glistening. The announcer's voice echoed from the stage. The show was about to begin. The hall filled with people, laughter, and the sound of tuning instruments. Lena took a seat backstage, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She could hear the applause as the first performer began. Her heart raced. Her name would be called soon, but deep inside she knew one thing for sure. Whatever happened, she had already won. Because for the first time in her life, she wasn't hiding. She was ready to let the world hear her voice, through the only language she truly knew, the piano. The night of the talent show arrived, and the community center was brighter than Lena had ever seen it. Fairy lights were strung along the walls. The stage shimmered under warm yellow spotlights, and the air was filled with the buzz of laughter and nervous excitement. People were arriving in groups, some carrying flowers for their friends, others chatting cheerfully while finding their seats. Behind the stage, Lena sat quietly on a wooden chair, her fingers nervously twisting the edge of her blue dress. She could hear the muffled sounds of the host greeting the audience, the echo of footsteps, and the faint hum of a microphone being tested. Every sound made her heart race faster. She had never been on a stage before. Just seeing the long red curtain in front of her made her hands tremble. She tried to take deep breaths like she'd practiced, but her chest still felt tight. Mr. Hale had stopped by earlier that evening to wish her luck. "You've already done the hardest part," he said. "You showed up." Those words kept replaying in her mind. She wanted to believe them. She peeked through a small gap in the curtain. The hall was full. Families, children, teachers. Even her cafe manager, Mrs. Drew, was sitting near the front. Lena froze. She hadn't told anyone she was performing. She wondered how Mrs. Drew had found out. The show began. The first act was a group of children singing a cheerful song. The crowd clapped along, laughing when one of the kids forgot the words. Next came a dancer, then a young boy playing violin. Each performer earned loud applause. Lena listened carefully to every note, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Her turn was listed toward the middle of the program. She wished it were at the end, so she'd have more time to prepare, or maybe never come at all. Her stomach twisted when she heard the announcer call the name before hers. She knew she was next. She stood up slowly, wiping her palms on her dress. Her heartbeat was so strong she could feel it in her throat. Her name echoed through the hall, followed by polite applause. Her legs felt heavy as she stepped out from behind the curtain. The stage lights hit her face, warm and blinding. For a moment she couldn't see the audience, only shadows and outlines. The host gave her a reassuring nod and handed her the microphone. She leaned toward it, her voice barely above a whisper. "Good evening," she said. "I'll be playing a piece I wrote myself." Then she turned to the piano. The same piano she had found months ago, covered in dust and silence, now gleamed under the lights. Someone had polished it for the show. Her reflection shimmered faintly in its surface. She took a deep breath and sat down on the bench. For a moment, everything was still. She could hear a cough somewhere in the crowd, a chair creaking, someone whispering. Her fingers hovered above the keys. Then she began to play. The first notes were soft, hesitant, almost shy. like she was introducing herself through sound. The melody flowed slowly, uncertain at first, then growing steadier as her hands found their rhythm. It was the song she had written for herself, the one that carried all her unspoken feelings, loneliness, hope, and quiet strength. Each note told a piece of her story, the long days at the cafe, the nights alone fixing the piano, the memory of her grandmother's music filling her heart again. The room grew still. Conversation stopped. The audience listened, their faces softening as the music reached them. As she played, Lena forgot the crowd. She forgot the lights, the stage, even her fear. All she could feel was the sound, alive and warm beneath her fingertips. It wasn't about impressing anyone. It was about being heard for the first time. Her body moved with the rhythm, her eyes closed, her heart wide open. The music rose and fell like waves, full of emotion she never knew how to express in words. When she reached the final part, her fingers slowed. The last few notes lingered in the air, trembling softly before fading into silence. For a long moment, no one moved. The hall was completely still. Lena sat frozen, her hands resting on the keys, unsure if she had done something wrong. Then came the sound, faint at first, then growing louder. Applause. Not polite clapping, but deep, thunderous applause that filled the room. People stood, some cheering, some wiping their eyes. Lena blinked, unable to believe it. Her vision blurred with tears. She stood slowly and bowed, her legs shaking, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst. From the front row, Mrs. Drew smiled proudly, clapping harder than anyone. Even the town's music teacher, a man known for his strict opinions, stood up, nodding in approval. Lena's throat tightened. She wanted to say thank you, but no words came out. She just smiled, shy and overwhelmed, before walking off stage. Backstage, her hands trembled uncontrollably. She sat down on the nearest chair, staring at them as if they belonged to someone else. Mr. Hale appeared from behind a curtain, grinning from ear to ear. "You did it," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You showed them what I already knew." Lena laughed softly, still in disbelief. "I didn't think they'd like it." "They didn't like it," he said. "They loved it." The rest of the show went on, but Lena barely heard any of it. Her mind replayed the moment over and over. The silence before the applause, the look of surprise on people's faces, the feeling of being seen, truly seen, for the first time. When the event ended, several people came up to her. The community center manager hugged her and said, "You brought that piano back to life." "Thank you." A few others asked if she took lessons, and she smiled shyly. "No, I just practiced." "You should perform again," one woman said. "You've got a gift." It all felt unreal. Just a few months ago, she had been invisible. Now strangers were calling her talented. Later, when the crowd left and the hall grew quiet again, Lena returned to the stage. The piano sat under the soft glow of the remaining lights. She touched its surface gently, whispering, "We did it." Mr. Hale came over, locking the back doors. "So," he said with a smile, "does this mean you'll keep playing?" She nodded. "I think I will. I don't want to stop anymore." He patted her shoulder. "Good. The world needs to hear more from you." As she walked home that night, the air was cool, the streets wet from earlier rain. The sound of her shoes echoed softly on the pavement. But in her heart, there was music, a quiet, glowing melody that made everything feel lighter. When she reached her small apartment, she sat by the window, looking out at the sleepy town. She thought about how everything had changed in one evening. Not because of fame or prizes, but because she had finally allowed herself to be heard. The next morning at the cafe, things looked the same. Coffee brewing, customers chatting, the same faces ordering their usual drinks. But something was different. When Mrs. Drew walked in, she smiled at Lena. "I had no idea you could play like that," she said warmly. "You were wonderful last night," Lena blushed. "Thank you. I was really nervous." "Well," Mrs. Drew said with a wink, "you didn't look nervous. You looked like you belonged up there." The other staff, who rarely paid attention to her before, also started talking to her more. "We watched your video online," one of them said. "Someone posted it." "You were amazing." Lena was surprised. She hadn't realized someone had recorded it. The thought made her both shy and happy. All day people came into the cafe and mentioned the performance. You're the piano girl, right? One customer asked. That song was beautiful. She smiled, still not used to the attention. Thank you, she said softly, handing over their drink. By evening, when the cafe quieted down, she found herself humming the same melody again. It was still inside her, alive and warm. That night, she went back to the community center. The lights were dim and the hall empty, but the piano waited for her like an old friend. She sat down and began to play, not to impress anyone, not to be heard this time, but simply because she loved it. As her fingers moved across the keys, she realized something important. The applause, the recognition, it was all wonderful, but what truly mattered was how the music made her feel. It had healed something inside her that had been broken for years. She smiled through the soft glow of the room. This is just the beginning, she whispered to herself, and deep in her heart she knew she was right. The days after the talent show felt different for Lena. It wasn't that her life had suddenly changed in a grand way. She still worked at the same cafe, lived in the same small apartment, and walked the same quiet streets. But the air around her felt lighter now, as if the world had finally noticed her presence. People greeted her differently. The customers who once gave her brief nods now smiled and asked, "You're the girl who played at the show, right?" Some even stayed a bit longer just to talk. She wasn't used to so much attention, but she tried to stay humble, always answering softly, "Yes, that was me." Mrs. Drew, her boss, seemed prouder than ever. She'd often mention it to new customers. "Our Lena is quite the musician, you know. You should have heard her play." And every time she said that, Lena would blush, not knowing what to do with the sudden warmth in people's eyes. Still, despite all the kind words, she didn't let it get to her head. Every evening after work, she still went back to the community center, to the same piano that had started it all. It had become her safe place. One night, as she was practicing quietly, Mr. Hale walked in carrying a small box. "I found these in the storage room," he said with a grin. Inside were stacks of old sheet music, some yellowed with age. "Thought you might like them." Her face lit up. "Really, can I keep them?" He nodded. "They've been collecting dust for years. Better in your hands than forgotten in a box." She spent hours flipping through them, simple waltzes, old classical pieces, handwritten notes from students who had once learned there. It felt like discovering stories from other people's lives. Some pieces were too hard, but she promised herself she'd learn them one day. As weeks passed, Lena's confidence grew. She began to play more complex songs, learning new rhythms and experimenting with her own melodies. The more she played, the more she realized music wasn't just something she liked. It was who she was. One evening, while she was lost in a song, a soft knock echoed from the door. She turned to see a young girl, maybe 12 or 13, standing shyly by the doorway with a small notebook in her hands. "Are you the piano lady?" the girl asked timidly. Lena smiled. "I suppose I am." The girl stepped closer. "I saw you play at the talent night. You were really good." "Thank you," Lena said warmly. "Do you play too?" The girl shook her head. "No, but I want to learn. My family can't afford lessons." Something in Lena's heart tightened. She saw her younger self in the girl's eyes, and that same longing, that same quiet hope. She thought of her own childhood, of the piano she'd lost and the dream she'd buried. "Come here," she said gently, patting the bench beside her. "Let's start with something simple." That night, Lena taught the girl how to find middle C, how to place her fingers gently, and how to press each key like it mattered. The girl's eyes lit up when she produced her first clear note. It was off-key, uneven, but it was hers, and she beamed like she'd just discovered magic. When the lesson ended, the girl hugged her tightly. "Thank you," she whispered. "No one ever taught me anything like this before." Lena smiled. "You can come again any time. The piano's always waiting." After the girl left, Lena sat there for a long while thinking. For the first time, she felt something new. Not just joy in playing, but joy in sharing. Music wasn't just for her anymore. It was something she could give to others. Soon, word spread quietly through the community center. A few more children began stopping by in the evenings. Some were curious, some shy, some just wanted to listen. Lena never charged them a thing. She taught them the little she knew, how to hold their hands right, how to follow the rhythm, how to feel the music instead of just playing it. The hall, once silent and forgotten, now filled with laughter, chatter, and scattered notes from tiny hands learning to play. Mr. Hale often stood by the doorway, smiling proudly. "You've turned this place alive again," he told her one night. "I didn't mean to," she said, laughing softly. "That's what makes it special," he replied. As more people heard about her free lessons, something unexpected happened. A few parents offered to donate small amounts to help maintain the piano. One man even volunteered to tune it properly for the first time in years. The sound became clearer, warmer, like a new beginning. Lena's evenings became her favorite part of the day. She'd work at the cafe, rush through her chores, and then spend hours teaching. She no longer felt invisible. She had a purpose now, something meaningful that brought light not just to her life but to others too. One afternoon, as she was setting up for a lesson, a tall man in a suit entered the hall. He looked around curious. "Excuse me," he said. "Are you the one who played at the town show a while back?" Lena nodded, unsure what to expect. He smiled. "I'm the director of the Regional Art Center. Someone showed me a video of your performance. You've got a real gift. Have you ever thought of performing outside the town?" She blinked, speechless. "Outside the town?" "Yes," he said kindly. "We host small music gatherings every season. Local artists perform. It's not a competition, just a showcase of talent. I'd love for you to be part of it." Lena hesitated. The idea of performing again, especially beyond her little town, made her nervous. But something inside her said this was a chance she shouldn't ignore. I'd be honored," she finally said. He handed her a card. "I'll be in touch with the details. And by the way," he added with a smile, "you're doing a wonderful thing here teaching these kids. Keep it up." After he left, Lena sat down at the piano, stunned. Just a few months ago, she'd been an invisible cafe worker with a dusty dream. Now she was being invited to play at a real event. When she told Mr. Hale, his eyes lit up. "See? The world's finally hearing your music." "You've earned this." Lena smiled, though her heart raced at the thought of standing on another stage. She wasn't sure if she was ready, but she knew one thing: she wouldn't hide anymore. That night, as she walked home, she thought about her journey. It had started with loneliness, but somehow through music she'd found connection, with people, with children, with herself. At home, she sat by the window and looked out at the glowing lights of the town. Somewhere out there, people were still humming her melody. Maybe they didn't even realize it, but her music had reached them in small ways. The day of the regional showcase came faster than she expected. The art center was much bigger than her town hall, with a grand stage and rows of shining seats. Lena felt the same nervous flutter she'd felt the night of her first performance, but this time, she wasn't alone. A few of her students came to watch, sitting proudly in the front row. Before going on stage, she took a deep breath and whispered to herself, "Just play from your heart," and that's exactly what she did. The music she played that day wasn't just a song. It was her journey, her gratitude, her growth. It carried the sound of every lesson, every late-night practice, every child's laughter that had echoed through that old hall. When she finished, the applause came again, strong, heartfelt, and full of warmth. People stood, clapping until her hands trembled with emotion. After the show, several performers came up to her to compliment her playing. One woman said, "Your music feels like home." "It's rare to hear something that honest." Lena smiled, humbled. "Thank you. That means a lot." As she left the hall that evening, her students ran up to her, eyes shining. "You were amazing," one of them said. "I want to play like you someday." She knelt down, smiling. "You will. Maybe even better." They laughed and hugged her, their excitement filling the air. As the sun began to set, Lena realized something beautiful. Her music had started with loneliness but had grown into something that touched lives. It had given her purpose, courage, and a way to lift others. And as she walked home that evening, she felt no fear, no doubt, only quiet peace. The girl who once sat alone at a dusty piano was no longer overlooked. She was finally seen, finally heard, and finally free. The morning after the regional showcase, Lena woke up to the soft sunlight spilling through her small window. For a few quiet moments, she simply sat there, trying to believe what had happened. The applause, the standing ovation, the kind words from strangers. It all felt like a dream she had once imagined but never thought would come true. She made herself a cup of tea and sat by the window, holding the warm mug in her hands. The town below was waking up slowly. Children were walking to school, shopkeepers were opening their stores, and the familiar smell of bread drifted from the bakery nearby. Everything looked the same, yet inside her, something had changed. When she arrived at the cafe that day, Mrs. Drew almost ran to her. "You were on the local paper," she said, waving a folded newspaper excitedly. "Look, right here." Lena blinked, stunned. There it was, her picture at the piano, her name written below it with the headline, "Local Barista Captures Hearts at Regional Showcase." Her co-workers clapped and teased her gently. "Guess we'll need your autograph now," one of them joked. Lena just laughed, embarrassed but happy. Throughout the day, more customers came in, some recognizing her, some curious to know her story. She answered every question with humility, but deep down, she was still that same quiet girl who once played in an empty hall just for herself. That evening, after work, she returned to the community center as usual. The children were already waiting, sitting around the piano with excited faces. "We saw your picture," one of them shouted. "You're famous now." Lena smiled and shook her head. "Famous? No, I'm still your teacher, remember?" They laughed, and soon the room was filled with the familiar sound of scattered notes, laughter, and chatter. But even while teaching, Lena's mind wandered. She kept thinking about what had come next. The man from the art center had mentioned another event, a larger concert in the city. It would be a chance to play for a much bigger audience. It was thrilling, but also terrifying. She had never left town, never stayed in a hotel, never even traveled by train alone. What if she wasn't good enough? What if she made mistakes in front of professionals? That night, as she walked home, the cool wind brushed her face. She looked up at the quiet sky and whispered, "I wish Grandma could see me now." Her grandmother had been the one person who believed she had something special, the one who used to play lullabies for her before life became too heavy. That memory gave her courage. A week later, the invitation arrived, a formal letter with gold edges. It read, "We would be honored to have you perform at the City Music Gala next month." Lena held the letter in her trembling hands. The City Music Gala, she had heard of it. Musicians from all over the region performed there, and the event was covered by radio and television. She wasn't sure if she was ready, but she said yes. She couldn't turn down a chance like that. The days that followed were filled with preparation. She practiced after work, sometimes late into the night, playing until her fingers ached. She wanted the performance to be more than just music. She wanted it to be a story, a reflection of her journey from silence to sound. Mr. Hale, who had always stood by her side, noticed the fatigue in her eyes one evening. "You should rest a little," he said gently. "I will," she promised, though she didn't. As the weeks passed, she grew more confident in her piece. It was something she had written herself, soft, emotional, filled with quiet strength. She called it The Window Light, inspired by the mornings she used to watch from her small apartment window, dreaming of something more. Finally, the day of the gala arrived. Lena woke before sunrise. Her bag was packed neatly, a simple dress, her music sheets, and a small silver locket that had belonged to her grandmother. She wore it around her neck for comfort. The train ride to the city was long. As the countryside rolled by outside the window, she thought of everything that had led to this: the cafe, the dusty piano, the children she'd taught, and the kind old man who had believed in her. When she arrived, the city overwhelmed her. Tall buildings, rushing cars, flashing lights. It was nothing like her quiet town. The art center was grand, with glass walls and soft music echoing from the hall inside. A woman from the staff greeted her kindly and guided her backstage. "You'll be performing third," she said. "Don't worry, just be yourself." Be herself. Those two words repeated in her head as she sat behind the curtains, listening to the first performer play. The pianist before her was flawless, confident, elegant, everything she wasn't sure she could be. Her palms began to sweat and her heart raced. Then she remembered something her grandmother once told her. "When you play, don't think of people watching. Think of the story you're telling. Music is only real when it feels alive." When her name was called, Lena stepped onto the stage. The lights were bright, blinding almost, but she walked slowly, keeping her breath steady. The piano stood in the center, shining under the soft glow of the stage lamps. She sat down, touched the keys gently, and closed her eyes for a moment. Then she began to play. The hall grew silent. The first notes were soft, fragile, almost hesitant, like whispers from her heart. But as the melody grew, her touch became stronger, bolder. The music flowed through her like a river finding its path. It wasn't just sound, it was her story. The lonely nights, the self-doubt, the quiet hope, the small victories, the kindness of strangers, all of it was woven into the music. When she reached the final note, there was a pause. For a moment, no one moved. Then slowly the applause began. Gentle at first, then louder, rising until the entire hall stood on its feet. Lena's eyes filled with tears. She bowed deeply, her heart overflowing. After the show, several people came up to her, praising her performance. One woman said, "Your music made me cry. It felt so real." An older man in a suit introduced himself as a music teacher from another city. "You have something special," he said. "Something you can't teach, honesty and sound. If you ever think of teaching full-time, my academy would welcome you." Lena was too overwhelmed to respond. She just smiled, thanking him softly. Later, as she stood outside the hall, she looked up at the city lights glowing against the dark sky. She had done it. The shy, quiet girl who once hid behind the cafe counter had stood on a grand stage and shared her heart with hundreds of people. On her way back to the train station, she passed a small street where a young boy was playing an old keyboard for coins. His music was rough, uncertain, but she saw the same spark in his eyes that she once had. She stopped and listened until he finished. "You play beautifully," she said, dropping a few coins into his box. The boy looked surprised. "Really, I'm just learning," she smiled. "Don't stop. One day someone will hear your music and never forget it." He grinned shyly and she walked away, her heart light. When she returned home that night, the town was quiet. The children had left her a small note on the piano. It read, "We watched your performance on TV. You made us proud." Tears filled her eyes as she read it. She sat down at the piano and began to play the same piece again, softly, just for herself. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, and the faint sound of her melody drifted through the open windows of the community center. Somewhere in the dark, life moved on, quietly, beautifully, as if the whole world was listening. That night, as she closed her eyes, Lena knew something for sure. Music had not just changed her life. It had given her one, and this time she wasn't playing to be seen or heard. She was playing because she finally understood what her grandmother meant. Music wasn't about perfection. It was about truth, and hers had finally been heard. The next few months moved quietly, like pages turning in a gentle book. Lena's life changed in small but meaningful ways. People recognized her now, not for fame or headlines, but for the way her music made them feel. She still worked at the cafe, still taught at the community center, but something about her presence carried calmness, like a song that lingered even after the last note had ended. She no longer rushed through her days. Every morning she would wake early, make a cup of tea and sit by her window. The sunlight always fell across her piano keys in soft stripes, and she often played a few notes just to feel alive before the day began. Her students grew in number. The small group of children she'd started with turned into a class of nearly 20. Some were shy, some full of energy, but all of them carried a spark in their eyes when they touched the keys. Parents often stayed to listen, smiling as their kids fumbled through songs with determination. One afternoon, after a long day of teaching, a woman approached her. She was one of the parents, her eyes glistening with emotion. "My son never used to talk much," she said quietly. "But since you started teaching him, he hums around the house. He's happier now." "Thank you." Lena felt her throat tighten. "Music has a way of opening hearts," she said softly. "I'm just glad he found joy in it." Moments like that reminded her why she did what she did. The applause, the lights, the big halls, and they were wonderful memories, but this right here, the smiles, the laughter, the small victories, this was real life. This was where her heart belonged. One evening, Mr. Hale joined her by the piano as she cleaned up after class. He leaned on his cane, watching her gently cover the keys. "You know," he said with a fond smile, "I think that old piano's got a new soul now. And I think you're the one who gave it back." She looked up, smiling. "Maybe it gave me one too," he chuckled. "You've done something special, Lena. You've turned this place into more than a hall. It's become a home. Her eyes softened. It's strange, she said quietly. I used to come here to escape the world. Now it feels like the world comes here to breathe. The weeks went by and soon winter came. The streets of the town were decorated with small golden lights and the air smelled of cinnamon and pine. The community center planned a small winter concert, and the children begged Lena to let them perform. At first she hesitated. Are you sure? She asked, laughing. That's a big step, but their excitement was contagious. Please, Miss Lena, we can do it, they insisted, so she agreed. Together they prepared for weeks, practicing carols and small piano pieces. The children learned teamwork, patience, and courage, the same things Lena had once struggled to find. The night of the concert arrived with snow gently falling outside. Families filled the hall, the same one that had once stood empty when Lena played in secret. Now it was full of laughter, chatter, and warmth. Lena stood by the side of the stage watching her students play. Each note filled her heart with pride. Some missed a beat, others stumbled, but it didn't matter. Every song carried love, and every child shone in their own way. When it was over, the audience clapped loudly, some even standing to cheer. The children beamed with joy. One of the smallest girls ran to Lena and threw her arms around her. We did it, she said breathlessly. Lena hugged her tightly. Yes, you did. And you were wonderful. After everyone left, the hall grew quiet again. Only the sound of wind brushing against the windows remained. Lena sat at the piano one last time that night, her fingers tracing the smooth surface of the keys. She began to play a soft tune, not planned, not written down, just something that came from her heart. It was peaceful, tender, and full of gratitude. Mr. Hale, who was locking up, stopped to listen. He didn't say a word. He just stood there, smiling. When she finished, he said softly, You know, Lena, when I first heard you playing here alone, I thought you were hiding from the world. Now I see you were just waiting for the right moment to share your light. She smiled through tears. Maybe I was. Over time, word about Lena's music continued to spread. A local school invited her to give piano lessons. A nearby town asked her to perform for a charity event. Even radio stations began playing recordings of her pieces. But she never changed who she was. She still wore simple clothes, still took long walks home, still helped at the cafe whenever Mrs. Drew needed an extra hand. Fame didn't touch her heart. Kindness did. One morning, while checking the mail, Lena found a letter with no return address. Inside was a small folded paper and a single sentence written in careful handwriting. Your music helped me find hope again. No name, no details, just that. She sat by the piano holding the note, tears falling quietly. It amazed her how music could travel so far, reach so deeply, without needing to say a single word. As spring returned, the town's mayor announced plans to restore the old community center completely. New lights, fresh paint, repaired windows. He said it was now a place of hope, and he invited Lena to play at the reopening ceremony. The day of the ceremony, the hall looked beautiful. Flowers lined the stage. Children sat in the front row and the once dusty piano gleamed like new. Lena walked to the center slowly, her hands trembling slightly, just as they had that very first night years ago. But this time, the fear was gone. It was replaced by peace, the kind that comes when you know you're exactly where you're meant to be. She played a piece she had written just for the occasion. It was simple but full of heart, a melody that told her story without words. It began softly, like a whisper of forgotten dreams, then grew into something bright and full, echoing the sound of hope returning. As the last note faded, the audience rose to their feet. Children clapped wildly, parents smiled proudly, and even Mr. Hale wiped his eyes. The applause washed over her like warm sunlight. That evening, after everyone had gone home, Lena stayed behind for a while. She looked around the empty hall, at the chairs, the lights, the old piano, and felt a deep sense of peace. She whispered softly, "Thank you," not to anyone in particular, but to life itself. Later, as she walked home through the quiet streets, snow began to fall again. The lights glimmered softly on the ground and the air smelled of winter. She pulled her scarf tighter, humming the same melody she had just played. When she reached her apartment, she lit a candle, sat at her piano, and opened her notebook. Inside were pages filled with small ideas, fragments of songs and notes about her students. She began writing again, not for fame, not for others, but for herself. She wrote about the girl who once went unnoticed, the woman who found her voice, and the music that changed everything. Her story wasn't about being discovered. It was about discovering herself. And in that quiet room, as the candle flickered and the keys glowed faintly in the light, Lena realized that she no longer needed an audience to feel seen, because she had found something better, a purpose. Every note she played, every child she taught, every song she wrote carried a piece of her journey. And though life would go on, with new faces, new songs, and new days, the heart of her story would remain the same. A humble woman, once overlooked by everyone, who found her voice in the sound of a piano. The world had finally heard her melody, but the truth was it had always been there, waiting to be played.